I'm just going to show you just a few. Because when it came out Friday night that Bernie Sanders was running for president, or is going to announce his run for president, all of these hacks that I just told you about came out, and I think a lot of them are actually bots, but you started seeing the Never Bernie hashtag trending, which I looked at it. There was a lot of accounts with like 2 followers, and it looked like bots to me. Trump over Bernie for sure. Basically same dude, but Trump is too stupid to hide it, so at least we know what we're up against. Yeah, Bernie Sanders and Trump, Trump banning Muslims, want to build a wall. He's just the same with someone saying Medicare for all, free public college, get out of Afghanistan, stop these wars all over the country. They're just the same guy. Biden, Klobuchar, Warren, Beto, Harris, Kennedy, Schiff, Swalwell, Holder, Booker, Castro, Newsom, Yates, Brown, Gillibrand, Buttigieg. Fit, qualified, people of achievement who believe in the Democratic platform and values that cut across all issues for all people. Oh my God. Never Bernie. This one I love. Never Bernie and his hashtag trickle down civil rights movement. I don't even know what that means. Trickle down civil rights movement. Got that, Bernie bots? Automatic block for you. I will not have you attacking Dems on my timeline. Glad to see there are more than a few Democrats that aren't having it this time. Bernie putting himself before the country again. How could anyone even think of voting for him after he voted in favor of lifting sanctions? Never Bernie because he's not a true Democrat. Run as an independent, Bernard. You can't sit with us. If I could talk to Bernie Sanders personally, I would implore him not run, considering what this country has gone through in the past 2 years and continues to go through. I would tell him that the most compassionate and noble thing he could do would be to step aside. Yes, the most popular politician in the country should just step aside. That's how we'll beat Donald Trump. I'd rather not end up like Venezuela. Oh, that talking point. Even though Venezuela is in the shape it's in because of the United States sanctions. So the United States destroyed Venezuela and then says, look at Venezuela. You don't want to end up like Venezuela. All of his supporters run these insane litmus and purity tests of every other Democratic candidate without even realizing Senator Sanders would fail if they applied the same rules to him. No, we have applied the same rules to him. He doesn't take the money that they're taking. The quote, only Bernie could save us crowd is obnoxious and toxic. They helped give us Trump. Thank you, Jason, $5 in the GoFundMe. Oh, these people. This is the bullshit I'm talking about right here. Bernie Benedict fucking Sanders. Once again. I'm sorry, I had to. It's just too entertaining. And by the way, what's his name? Port Film Co-op. Venezuela is a dictatorship. That is basically American propaganda. I interviewed Ben Norton. Organizations, the Carter Foundation that looks into elections, couldn't find rigging in that election. Said it was a free and fair election where Maduro won re-election. Then he agreed to have the next election a year before it was supposed to be. So he agreed to move the election date up a year. It wasn't supposed to be in 2018. It was supposed to be this year, Venezuela's next election, but he agreed to move it up, and he won again. Has anyone saying it's a rigged election actually shown any evidence that it's a rigged election? No. But organizations around the world, including the Carter Foundation, said his original election, I think it was in 2013, he won fair and square. We didn't find any evidence of foul play. But the United States does this all the time because when they want to get rid of democratically elected leaders in Venezuela or Cuba or fill in the blank Latin American country, we say they're dictators. They're against human rights. Look at their economies that we have decimated by putting crippling sanctions. So it's a lot of propaganda. So the folks saying Maduro's a dictator, well, have you seen Guaido? Whatever his name is that's coming in? Who just named himself Venezuela's president? He's part of a right-wing extremist opposition. And by the way, I agree with the person who just said this in the super chat. I did not think Bernie Sanders' statement on this was strong enough. He put out talking points that kind of were aligned with the American talking points that Maduro's a dictator and he's awful and this, that. And I'm not defending Maduro, but what makes Maduro such an awful dictator that we have to in a non-democratic way get rid of him, but Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is okay? I'm talking to you, Barack Obama, who had him at the White House doing photo ops. So, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is awful? Or we need to get rid of Putin? Well, Barack Obama had Putin to the White House too. Barack Obama met with the King of Jordan. So all of a sudden, this guy, Maduro, is a step too far. All the other dictators that don't block us from their oil, that are friendly to our business interests, they're okay. They're okay. The elephant in the room, because you could have all the polls behind you. You could have the grassroots behind you. You could have, on paper, the best chance to beat Donald Trump. But there is an elephant in the room, and it's called the Democratic Party and election fraud. Let's keep it real. The Democratic Party rigged the election against Bernie Sanders in 2016. It might not necessarily have been rigging the voting machines, but they rigged it in the rules. They rigged it in how they called the elections. They rigged it as far as the primary calendar. They rigged it as far as how many debates there would be. They rigged it as far as, the networks calling the Iowa caucus for Hillary Clinton, even though Bernie Sanders was 1/10 of a point behind her. They rigged it by putting on the screen the delegates, including super delegates, to make it look like Hillary Clinton was way, way, way ahead of Bernie Sanders and make it look like he had no chance to beat her. They rigged it, in California. The Associated Press, a day before the California primary, is reporting that Hillary Clinton, essentially, Bernie Sanders is mathematically eliminated. They rig it in all sorts of ways. But the main way they rigged it, as WikiLeaks showed, you're a Russian agent by mentioning this. They rigged it because the Democratic Party was actively, as early as 2015, before Hillary Clinton announced, before Bernie Sanders announced, before anyone announced, the Democratic Party under Debbie Wasserman Schultz was essentially drafting their plan for Hillary Clinton for the general election. They rigged it by planting stories with their allies in the corporate media to basically paint Bernie Sanders as a communist and an atheist and all these terrible things. The Hillary Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee together created the Bernie bro myth. That came from the Hillary Clinton campaign. It was in WikiLeaks. They concocted this Bernie bro myth, and then they fed it to Politico, to CNN, to MSNBC, and all of their allies. That's how that happened. And then the corporate media ran with it, and then the establishment on social media and Twitter ran with it. And there you go. And I would tell the Democratic Party, don't assume you're going to beat Donald Trump with anyone like Kamala Harris. But I want to address the election fraud because I think Bernie Sanders, frankly, didn't handle it the right way in 2016. I think Bernie Sanders didn't handle it the right way after 2016, but especially during the campaign. Bernie Sanders, his underlying philosophy as a politician, and it's a very admirable one, is I want to run and win on the issues. I want to run a positive campaign. I'm not going to get down in the mud. I'm not going to complain about the corporate establishment and the media and election shenanigans. Well, Bernie, with all due respect, and I'm a Bernie fan, but I'll call him out when I have to. I've already called him out for his weak-ass statement on Venezuela. Bernie, you cannot, again, go to a knife fight holding a spoon. Okay? You are up against a legalized mafia. That is what the Democratic Party is. That is what the United Corporations of America is. It is a legalized mafia. Okay? So if you want to actually win, you got to roll up those sleeves and you got to get down in the mud with these people. We could try to be positive and all that when you become president or win the nomination. But you're not going to beat these people by sitting there saying, oh, well, I want to run a positive campaign. And to keep it real, here's the deal, Bernie. And I'll tell you, when I was at the Young Turks, I covered the New York primary purge. I covered it before anyone else covered it. On the day of the New York primary, I was at the courthouse when election integrity groups were suing the New York Board of Elections for the purge. At that point, they thought it was like 60, 70,000 people were purged. It came out later. It was 200,000 people were purged in New York, predominantly in Brooklyn, which is pretty progressive. I don't know if Bernie would have won New York, but it would have been a lot closer. But Bernie Sanders, he didn't say peep. He barely said anything about that. And I asked his campaign during that time when I was at the Young Turks. I mean, I'm not saying he has to go on and on and on 24/7 about this, but why is he not saying anything? It basically normalizes election fraud, voter suppression, because that's what happened in New York. They have an archaic rule that you have to change over. If you're not registered as a Democrat, you have to change over to being a Democrat 6 months before the primary. It is the most suppressive voter registration law in the United States. Who the hell is thinking about the primary 6 months before that they're going to register? Nobody. They also, you saw around the country, ballots, stations running out of ballots. You saw in Rhode Island, in Arizona, and other places, poll stations being shut down. In Rhode Island, they shut down 2/3 of the polling stations. Could that be because it was an open primary state? And the Democratic governor of Rhode Island was a huge Hillary Clinton fanatic. So an open primary state just suddenly closes down 2/3 of the polling stations. This happened in many other states on primary day. You have ballots being tossed out. You have people that have been registered as Democrats for decades. All of a sudden they're purged. This was everywhere. Yes, her name was Gina Raimondo. And Bernie barely said anything. And straight up, his campaign officials that I was in communication with after the New York primary said to me, well, A, we're understaffed, and B, Bernie doesn't want to come off like a sore loser. He doesn't want to come off like a sore loser because it will hurt him in the next states if the media and the Democratic Party could paint him as like, oh, Bernie's crying over spilled milk. Well, no, they're telling you that because they don't want you to raise awareness that this thing is rigged. They don't want you to raise awareness that this thing is rigged, because if you raise awareness and rally up your troops that they're rigging it, you're going to have a lot more eyes on it, and then the media won't be able to ignore it when it keeps happening. So, frankly, it doesn't matter. I interviewed Greg Palast a couple months ago. He's a great investigative journalist. He's done amazing work on the purges that happened in Georgia and how Brian Kemp stole that election from Stacey Abrams. And he basically said, you can win even with it being rigged, but you have to basically overperform to account for the rigging. Because he says they can't rig all the elections every single time. They could try to rig it, but they're not going to be victorious every single time. So you have to get like 52 to 53% of the vote to account for the shenanigans the establishment is going to try to do. And I think it makes a lot of sense. But Bernie Sanders, he is going to have to have a separate part of his campaign, a separate team, on top of election integrity. I'm not talking just like poll watchers on election day. I'm talking about looking at every single state, looking at their primary rules, looking at their voter registration rules, looking at how the cake is baked, and ranting and raving from the beginning about it. Not in a reactionary way after the primaries are held in a specific state, not in a reactionary way after the caucuses are held in a specific state, but before. So he's going to have to raise a stink early on about New York's restrictive and suppressive laws and get the grassroots in New York and around the country to put pressure on the governor of New York to change that law and the Board of Elections to change that law and replicate that for every other state, because there's a lot of laws with rules that by effect involve voter suppression. Even in the Democratic Party, the Democratic Party rightly rants against the Republican Party and their obvious voter suppression. But the Democratic Party does it too. The Democratic Party does it too. Bottom line, and you could record me saying this, you could save this clip, Bernie Sanders is not going to win the Democratic nomination if he does not fight from the beginning the election fraud and rigging. He has to call it by name: election fraud, voter suppression, undemocratic. He needs to have a large portion, maybe not a large portion, but a significant number of staffers dedicated to election law, each state by state, their voter registration deadlines, who oversees state-by-state elections, and do they have ties to the Democratic Party establishment? Do they have ties to any of the other candidates running? Bernie Sanders is going to have to be his own election integrity watchdog. And he cannot go forward reacting after the fact. He has to be on the offense as far as the election fraud and rigging. And I do have sources close to him that says, all I've been told, they're aware and they have, what did they tell me? They're aware and they have prepared for it. I don't know what that means, because Bernie, I'm sorry to tell you, if you got this, kumbaya vision, you're just going to put out a positive message. You're not going to be negative against anyone, and you're just going to win on the merits. That's not going to happen.